And rolling.
Hello, thank you for joining us for the California Liberation Movement Political Action Committee interview with Hannah Miyamoto. Recently, Rush Limbaugh was in the news saying that perhaps the country between red and blue, left and right, can't peacefully coexist anymore, and perhaps secession would be an option. That was picked up by Media Matters and then later by The Hill. The comment came out yesterday or this morning, and it's already blowing up, as they say, in viral media. Hannah, what is the significance of this quote from Mr. Limbaugh and your interpretation of it?
Well, first I want to say that we're recording this on December 10, 2020. Just getting that exact quote so that we have everybody's attention, we have everything correct. Because I want to emphasize today what he actually said, what was reported, and so we know that. But I believe it was Wednesday. He said it on Wednesday. And this is according to Media Matters. So actually, this is according to The Hill, reporting on Media Matters. But anyways, yeah. The quote is, I thought you were asking me something else when you said, can we win? I thought you meant, can we win the culture? Can we dominate the culture? I actually think, and I've referenced this, I've alluded to this a couple of times because I've seen others allude to this. I actually think that we're trending towards secession. It can't go on this way, he continued. There cannot be peaceful coexistence of two completely different theories of life, theories of government, theories of how we manage our affairs. We can't be in this dire conflict without something giving somewhere along the way. And that apparently is the relevant portion of the quotation. And I would, I will say that his point about, two different views about government, about life, about lifestyle. I would also even go on to a question about two different views of reality. Particularly our side believes that elections are to be respected, voters are to be respected, and the results are to be respected whether or not you win or lose. And the other side seems to only believe in election results if they win. And if they don't, then something horrible has happened and this all must be overthrown.
Right.
And I also was thinking, though, about, and I'm not going to accuse Rush Limbaugh of being a great historian, but I was reviewing the House Divided speech of Abraham Lincoln in 1858, which those who don't know it, I hadn't realized it, was actually his nomination speech when he accepted for United States Senate from the state of Illinois in the year 1858. I'll read briefly. If we could first know where we are, whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. Logical Lincoln kind of talk. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. And I also note, then he goes on, he talks about very recent events of the time. He talks about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was an 1854 law that was passed by Congress. It was controlled by the Democratic Party, the slave party, and which allowed, which said that it said that the people of whoever moved into this territory of Kansas, Nebraska, would be able to vote later on about whether or not they want slavery or not. In the meantime, they were allowed to bring their slaves into the state if they had any. And then, of course, the Dred Scott Act came along, and the Dred Scott decision, if you don't know, most people don't, But one of the key things Lincoln points out is it declared that Congress could not prevent a territory from having slavery on the grounds that it was a right of white men to own slaves.
Yeah. So how does this link back into?
Oh, and then another thing interesting was that he goes on and says, he points out that we have a new president. His name is James Buchanan. And he says he was elected by a popular minority. He actually was beaten by over 100,000 votes. But he won the Electoral College. So you have a president who's unpopular, who was the one who was supposed to be, as you know, and history would later, just 2 more years later, because he's talking 856. So 2 more years later, after this speech was given, he would be the guy who'd be standing around with his hands in his pocket while, 11 southern states are leaving the United States and doing nothing about it. So I found all that. I know we're going to get to this, but he says such a decision is all that his point was, of course, was that I guess what I'm trying to say is what Lincoln is saying was in his time, slavery is the most important issue, and it's time to stop pretending it isn't. The Republican Party, was an anti-slavery party at that time. That was like its whole reason to exist. It was you didn't oppose slavery, you opposed slavery, and so therefore you became Republican. And so he's preaching to the choir here. But he's saying here that we're not going to have we are violently different. I mean, because my answer is trying to say this: when I think about what Limbaugh says, about how can we dominate the culture and stuff like this, Lincoln's point was that the Democrats, the opposing party in his time, do not want you to think that slavery is wrong. And so and they did everything they could to manipulate the media, and much of this we have today. We have the myth of the half slave, beating his feet on the Mississippi mud, singing and dancing. You know what I'm saying? We have the house Negro who's treated gently by the plantation owner. And I could go on and on, but they created this whole mythology that slavery wasn't so bad, it wasn't a moral evil, and how dare you go out and say it was. And and even though the North won the war, we still have those myths. You will still hear people saying, every so often you'll hear a Republican, especially Republican, saying something about how slavery wasn't so bad, or even how I think wasn't it Trent Law who said wish we could go back to those days. I mean, could go on. I thought about that, and maybe to really run it into here, just so you know, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. Every city and house divided against itself shall not stand. He that is not with me is against me. He that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words shalt thou be condemned. So I'm trying to say is we are in a very sharp division. And that's what Limbaugh is really pointing out. The other piece I'd like to mention, though, is, okay, maybe we should let's make one thing clear. Limbaugh went on to say he did not support secession, but he makes it clear in context. The real reason he doesn't support secession is he believes that if the conservatives, whatever they are, band together, come out and vote, register to vote, blah, blah, they will win. The language, remember the language he uses? Can we win the culture? Can we dominate the culture? That's what I think he's saying. And I think I think I would go further. And if I had Mr. Limbaugh here, I would ask him this question directly. But it seems to me like he's saying, if I were to conclude that we can't win, that we're going to get outvoted, that we are in the minority and it's not going to change for decades to come, I would support secession. I think that's what he's saying. He's saying that right now we have a country, we're part of a country, we get the blue states to pay for everything, and I knows that, and it's great for conservatives, because they get to have their white supremacy, and they get to have, and they get to hold all this power because of a constitution that is biased in their favor.
Hmm.
The trouble is, the people, the people are not are not conservatives, are becoming less conservative by the day. And of course the far west here, we're now surrounded by states that have voted for Biden. Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico. The only state in the far west that is Utah that went vote for Trump. So, and Alaska narrowly voted for Trump. So, but yeah, well, I mean, nobody. That's part of it, frankly. Remember, I said, maybe you might remember, Marcus. Those of you, I don't know if we've said this on YouTube or not, guys, but hey, I said, if that a lot of Republicans, I mean that by rank and file Republicans, would find it very hard to believe that Arizona would vote for Biden. And I said they would say, well, that proves the election was fixed because there's no way that Arizona would go Democratic. Well, it went Democratic, and sure enough, that's exactly what people were saying. How could Arizona have gone Democratic? It couldn't have been a real election. It couldn't have been a fair election. So, yeah, I don't know. And I guess maybe moving on with all these other thoughts is the concept of normalcy bias. Who was that fine gentleman? I'll tell you, gentle readers, gentle viewers. There's a gentleman named I'm talking about the Yugoslavia article, Marcus.
Eric Hasseltine, former executive director to the National Security Agency on intelligence research.
Yes, and he's an expert in psychology, social psychology. And he wrote this article, folks, called "The U.S. Could Soon Dissolve Just Like Yugoslavia Did." And he put it in Psychology Today as a blog. And Psychology Today, of course, is one of the most prestigious magazines about psychology in the world, much less the USA. Dr. Hasseltine, we really should call him that, because he is a PhD, and he's got diploma wallpaper, kind of like I do. And so I actually know where he's coming from, by the way, because I'm trained in social psychology. So I'm actually aware of the same kind of thinking, kind of knowledge that he's talking about. The article, people, what I've just quoted, I think Dr. Hasseltine or someone else took it down, even though it was up on just for the 2nd of December. It was posted December 2nd of December, but I think he took it down. My suspicion is it was just considered to be a little bit too radical, even for Psychology Today. But let's just set that aside. His point was normalcy bias, and I'll explain that a little bit soon, what that means. Normalcy bias is preventing people in the United States, particularly our leaders, to accept that the United States could be going through severe shocks and trauma, especially because Donald Trump won't accept the election results, and B, the Republican Party almost entirely, all the elected officials now, with just very few exceptions, are encouraging this kind of thought. And normalcy bias is the idea, and so I think, and I think what Dr. Hasseltine is trying to say is that maybe if people realized that we are in a really bad situation. This isn't just Donald Trump being a bad boy. This isn't just Republicans making nice with Fox News viewers. This is a serious mortal threat to the integrity of the United States of America. And I think he's saying is maybe, and this is remember, Dr. Hazeltine is a national security expert and has been most of his life, right? Maybe if people realize this, then they would not act like this. Normalcy bias is the idea that whenever you're in a dire situation, people tend to presume that it's really not an emergency. They tend to diminish the danger, and they tend to react too late. To give you an example, I think we can all relate to is 9/11, the morning of 9/11, right? Personally, I don't know what you were doing, Marcus, but personally, I was in Central Time Zone in the state of Wisconsin at the time, so I'm turning on the news. I was a college student, blah blah blah. About 9 o'clock, turn on the news. The World Trade Center's on fire. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And there wasn't much to see. It was just the cameras pointing, the skyscraper's on fire. And it was treated like, maybe here in California, people had a little later view. They were probably in bed when that actually happened. But it was treated like, well, the World Trade Center's on fire. That's terrible. And, we're thinking about the people being inside and are they being rescued? And we didn't. The idea that it was a terrorist attack only happened when the second jet hit the second tower, right? That was the moment when suddenly we started to think this isn't just a terrible tragedy involving an unintentional some accident, something happened, a fire burst out in a way. Originally, we thought it was a one jet hit by accident, right? When the second jet hit, we knew it wasn't an accident anymore, and suddenly, right? That's normalcy bias. You had literally the whole world thinking this happened, and they didn't think the worst possible explanation. They thought of an explanation that would make it seem like everything's okay. You're going to be okay. The world's not going to be plunged in a global war on terror. Fortunately, the people who are in charge of the airspace were at that very moment, little did we know, frantically, of course, shutting down the whole airport, the whole aviation system in the United States. And so, although in a sense, as we all know, we weren't able to save the lives of three whole jet airliners and all the passengers aboard. But be that as it may, that's normalcy bias. And so now think about the United States of America, right? We're standing around watching the country sort of sizzle and smolder. And, and every time you suggest, this is not a normal situation, this could go very, very bad. And what can I tell you? Did you hear this morning, or was it yesterday? It was just in the last 2 days, someone walked into the Democratic Party office in Spokane, Washington, claiming to have a bomb on his body. So we have a would-be suicide bomber. This time, it was a hoax. This time, it wasn't real.
So you're saying Dr. Hazeltine is talking about normative bias when he's saying they won't think that America will fall apart, and he's saying actually it could be close to doing so. The Yugoslavs didn't see that, and you're aligning that with the American opinion or what happened on 9/11, where it was a terrorist attack, but Americans initially thought through normalcy bias that everything's fine.
More or less fine. Yeah, we thought it was right. Even though we just thought it was an accident, right? The first jet hit. Everyone knew that it had been just set on fire by a crashing jet, but we just thought somehow something went wrong. Occasionally airplanes hit buildings. I mean, after all, it happened in 1945 with a B-29. That whole B-25, and 1945, the Empire State Building was hit by an airplane. So everyone was talking about that. I remember right. They said, well, maybe it happened again.
Right. So you're saying Americans are susceptible to normative bias. It can happen, and the NSA director retired, is saying that they may be using that bias frame to not appreciate the severe danger that America is in breaking apart. And I guess that alludes to what Rush Limbaugh is highlighting. His statement may somewhat be proselytizing in the same direction as Hasseltine's statement, that perhaps things are not stable and are likely and potentially could break apart. Is that a summary? Fair?
I think Limbaugh is expressing frustration because the political results were not what he wanted. I mean, that's what I would say. That he's a conservative, like most conservatives. He's not happy with the election results. The Hill article, for instance, points out that one Representative Price Wallace, a congressman from Texas, the very night of the election, had said his state needs to secede from the Union and form our own country. So, then he was very quickly withdrew that. But yeah, there's the what can I say? It comes over and over again. I was just seeing an article where I think it was on MSNBC, and they were saying that, and this person on there said, look, if you take the Republicans at their word, the Trump supporters, that saying if the election's invalid, and you're justifying revolution because that's your only alternative. As we all know, right now in the state of Georgia, you got Republicans who are sitting there gnawing their fingernails because they're worried that that their voters are going to be so discouraged because the election was stolen, quote unquote. They're going to say, why should I bother voting in this election? The one that's going to decide the composition of the U.S. Senate, right? Well, that's just that one will be stolen too. The Democrats steal that too. I mean, the whole idea is absurd, by the way, because don't forget, as has been pointed out, if Donald Trump, if the election for the presidential election in Georgia was stolen by the Democrats, then why would the Republican elected officials in Georgia have helped the Democrats? Or was this a conspiracy of Republicans against?
Yeah,
I mean, what
yeah.
I'm trying to say. No reasonable explanation. It's not real. It's absurd to think that the election was stolen in Georgia, because of course, Georgia is controlled by Republicans, and even the Secretary of State is a Republican. So how could it have happened? No. It obviously was a valid election, and Biden won by a slim majority. So, anyways, yeah, I think that I'm just saying that let's probably go back to the beginning. What Limbaugh said has obviously been very has attracted a lot of attention because Rush Limbaugh is still a widely followed persona, and I guess what's shocking here is, what we can say is he's absolutely right. He has put his finger on one thing, which is the United States of America is violently, that's too strong a word. That's not the right word I meant. There's just a strong division in this country that, and it's becoming bipolar. It's not just a constituency, right? You got, it's very, certainly, if you believe, for instance, that a man can marry and have children, it's very hard to deal with somebody who thinks that homosexuality is a mortal sin, and that and that children are no middle ground here other than tolerance. If you tell that person who feels so strongly, well, you're entitled to feel how you feel, but leave these people alone, he's going to say, you're stepping on my rights. You're outlaw hate speech. You're on and on. And of course, abortion is the other obvious example, right? The The pro-choice position is I let other people control their own bodies. That's the pro-choice position. And but the anti-abortion, the anti-choice position is I will control other people's choices. Hence, it's called anti-choice. And those people have murdered a number of doctors, patients, nurses, politicians, in the name of their cause. So, anyways, and then we could go on because what we are saying tonight, Marcus, could be very prophetic. You've got Democrats and Republicans alike. There was that Secretary of State, I believe, in Georgia, basically saying someone's going to get killed. You got to stop this. And maybe it's ultimately, I guess, and I guess what Limbaugh is saying, is one of those times when the old broken clock can be right. There is, can we peacefully coexist? Maybe we'll close by just reminding people that some people will say, well, we can't coexist, we can't divide up. You can't divide the country into red states and blue states because also all the states have got red and blue people in them, if you will, right? Conservatives and liberals. And there's very few states that are so, even California is probably two-thirds liberal, one-third conservative state, right?
And far north. Yeah.
Well, that's just far north. I mean, my next door neighbor could be a conservative. There's certainly people having Trump stickers on their cars in my neighborhood. I live in San Diego County, northern San Diego County. But I guess what I say to that is that we seem to be very good at keeping our states together. Maybe it's just simply the fact that it's hard to hate somebody in your own community unless you're really, really that kind of person, right? It's seriously, right? I mean, you think about it. The person in, say, the person in rural Mississippi says something like, those liberal Californians, I hate them, right? But if you ask him about the liberal in his own town, the chances are he's going to say, oh, Hal's a great guy. I don't agree with everything he says, of course.
Yeah. Otherism grows larger in direct relation to distance from the person being other. So the further away from you are, the further the person you want to look at differently is from you. The less routinely you come into interaction with them, the easier it is to put those labels on. And so simply by living with that person in the same state, it's harder to be biased against them because you're constantly bumping into them versus someone
and
way
you
out
share
there.
so many things, right? Right? I mean, I always like to point out the beautiful thing about California is I can go to Dunsmuir and I can find people who call themselves Californians. I mean, the passion for Cali is the same whether you live in Truckee or you live in Castro or you live in San Ysidro or you live in Dunsmuir, right? You're a Californian.
Yeah.
And even on the very borders of the state. And also, I mean, think about it. You're Californians, you're to root for the various California sports teams and, California values are at least at that level, some sort of commonality, right? But the person in Mississippi, who, has the hound dog and the double wide trailer and goes to the Baptist church, feels very hard to appreciate CA, and maybe the most they can say is, I went out there once and I don't know how I'm going to live out there. And, that's sort of the way they would talk, right? Fine. Obviously, they don't like to live in California, but they then seem to go on further and say, then they hate Californians. It's bizarre, and because they say, how can you live out? They should be saying, of course, well, I'm glad you can live out there and you're happy. Why? Because I'm a good Christian, I guess, because I want other people to be happy and satisfied and content. I guess, what? How hard can this be? So anyways, I guess going around in circles. But yeah, this is what's really shocking. Let's just see what happens. his point about that we've got these real different views of theories of life and government and and it's and maybe I should emphasize that he did criticize the rhinos. That's what he called. That's the trouble, though, right? The Republic is a name owner only. He blames them, but I would put it to you that what's a rhino but somebody who realizes I've got some non-conservative people in my district and I'd like to get their vote. And that's the thing. Limbaugh's problem is he really thinks every Republican should think like he does. And basically, and I don't know what point he's going to realize that ain't going to happen, but whatever it is, yeah, we're in a dire situation, and I guess we'll just wrap it up by saying normalcy bias, people, look it up. We should say links in below, right? We'll put some links in below to give you some education, some objective links, articles about normalcy bias, and you can sort of see what it is. Like we've explained it, how it is happening. And the Limbaugh article and the like, and you can decide for yourself. But just say that the media, it's funny, right? Because the media likes to exaggerate problems, but maybe in this case they're underestimating the problem, because there's no doubt that there is a real, what Limbaugh is right? We have a real deadlock. We have a real conflict of values, and it's very emotional, and people are making a lot of threats, and around this is somehow the idea this is safe. Somehow, somehow you can, as I'm trying to say, right? You could take a can of gasoline and put it in your car and burn it all up, and it doesn't do any damage to anybody. But take that can of gasoline and fling it on an open fire, and you're going to have a fireball. See what I'm saying? In other words, maybe we are under tensions that are not going to be contained. You know what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say here, right?
Yeah.
Gasoline is contained in an engine, and that makes it safe, right? It's a lot of technology that basically is used to get the energy out of gasoline. But if you just let it up, it's going to make it's going to go out of control, and it's also be very fast. So in the same way, we are, consider this, that are we, when you say everything's going to be fine, like then, I mean, we always say this, don't we, Marcus? We don't want violence. We don't want anything terrible to happen. We really don't. Even if we're going to sit here with California flags, right? We don't want violence. However, ask yourself this, kind viewer, is your assumption that everything's going to be okay really based on reality? Isn't it possible that you're biased because of your normal human normalcy bias to believe that because America hasn't had a civil war since 1865, therefore we can't have one now? Because the way people are talking, I mean, and and you go back to Lincoln's House Divided speech. He's really talking about is we've got this violent. I mean, we've got this very severe difference of values going on here. Maybe it was easier to say slavery was a question of value, was a sharp question of values, and well, nothing's that bad. But I think white supremacy is something pretty serious too. And right now, Georgia Republicans seem to still trying to prevent African American citizens who are Georgians from voting. And of course, part of that is by saying, and when you say also that this vote or that vote is not valid because it was, it's what can you say? It's all pretty crazy. I think Rachel Maddow pointed out just yesterday that one of the Republicans closed down early voting I guess, in Forsyth County. But and a lot of MAGA people, a lot of Trump people, were all tweeting saying, yeah, they shut down the voting in Forsyth County. Well, guess what? Forsyth County is predominantly Republican.
I got to go in 2 minutes.
Okay, well, I can
so
go now. Then thank you very much for listening. Do you have any other questions? Did I provoke some thought here that you want to react to this?
check out the Limbaugh article. Look at normative bias. See if
bias.
you're not appreciating the tinder that could go up in a ball of flame and ignite a storm of secession. And simply because we're looking at it, the evidence is there, but we have this bias programmed into us. I think that's what you said, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think looking at the tweet by Limbaugh, especially under the shadow of a former NSA director saying very similar things with a week ago, I don't find it a random chance that Limbaugh and the NSA director are hinting at a similar contextualization of political dynamics within days of each other. I think normative bias is real. I think we need to watch out for it. And I think things could be a lot more hairy than we're letting on. And I think that's what you illuminated for everybody today and did quite well at it.
Thank you. It's normalcy bias, people. MANORMLCY. Sorry, Marcus. Correct. Normative bias would be something entirely different. Normalcy bias is what we're talking about. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. Good day.
You have to hit